Right now, somewhere in Britain, a train is about to pull out of a station with a driver, a guard, and a fully fueled engine, and not one single paying passenger on board. It's not running late. It's not a test run. It's not a mistake. The company running it knows exactly how empty it is, and they've sent it out on that exact schedule for years, sometimes decades. There are dozens of these routes quietly buried inside the UK rail timetable right now. Once you learn how to spot one, you start seeing them everywhere. So here's the actual question. Why would any company in an industry constantly asking for more funding deliberately keep burning money on a service that nobody rides? That sounds like the kind of decision that gets someone fired. Instead, it might be one of the most quietly rational decisions in the entire railway industry. And once you see the math behind it, you'll start noticing the same logic hiding in businesses that have nothing to do with trains at all. To understand why, we need to follow the money. Starting with a law from 1844 that technically is still shaping train timetables today. Picture Stockport on a Saturday morning. Once a week, only on Saturdays. A train departs bound for Stalybridge, 8 miles down the line. It's not secret, but it's barely advertised. Plenty of ticket staff working the same station that morning have never heard of it. Whoever boards is more or less guaranteed the entire carriage to themselves. This isn't an isolated quirk. Head down to Pilning, near Bristol, and you'll find a station served by exactly one train each direction, once a week. Up in Scotland, Barry Links and Gulf Street get the same treatment. In London, a Chiltern Railway service quietly runs from West Ealing to High Wycombe on weekdays. A route so obscure that most journey planning apps will route you around it entirely through a completely different set of trains. Railway enthusiasts have a name for these: parliamentary trains, or more simply, ghost trains. And once you start looking, the map of Britain is dotted with dozens of them. There's an entire hobbyist community built around hunting them down, collecting station stamps, timing their trip to catch a service that runs once every 7 days, and swapping notes online about which platform inspector looked most surprised to see an actual passenger. To them, it's a game. But every one of these routes exists because of a specific, deliberate financial calculation made by a company that would very much rather you didn't notice it. Here's where it gets interesting. None of this is an accident, and none of it is illegal. It's actually the opposite. These trains exist because closing them down is harder, slower, and more expensive than simply running them. To understand why, go back to 1844, when Parliament forced every railway company to run at least one cheap, basic train a day on every line, so working people could actually afford to travel. That specific legal requirement eventually disappeared, but the habit of running a bare minimum token service stuck around. By the 1960s, Britain was gutting its rail network under the infamous beaching cuts, but the Transport Act, 1962, gave passengers a formal right to object to any line closure on the grounds of hardship. Objections could drag on for years and derail the whole process politically. So operators found a workaround. Instead of closing a line and fighting a public inquiry, just keep one nearly invisible train running on it. Once a week is enough. It doesn't need to be convenient. It doesn't even need passengers. As long as a train legally calls at the station, the line counts as open, and the entire expensive closure process never has to start. There's even a legal wrinkle underneath the wrinkle. In 1981, Parliament passed what's now known as the Speller Act, which let operators launch brand new, experimental services that could be pulled without going through the full closure process if they flopped. Why does that matter? Because before 1981, starting a new service on a whim was dangerous. If it failed, operators could get legally trapped running it forever, creating an accidental ghost train. The fix didn't remove the loophole. It just made sure companies could keep using it on their own terms. So what does actually keeping one of these trains alive cost? On the variable side, not much. The driver, the guard, and the train are usually already outrunning other profitable services that day. The ghost train is often just a short detour bolted onto an existing shift. The real extra costs are things like traction electricity, roughly a few £100s for a 50-mile electric journey, and Network Rail's track access charges, which on a quiet secondary line can run somewhere around £5 to £7 per train mile. Multiply that out for one round trip once a week, and you're looking at a few £1,000s a year. Now compare that to what it costs to formally close a line. Before an operator can even apply, the Department for Transport requires a full assessment covering passenger impact, environmental effects, and the wider economic consequences for the surrounding area. That report then has to be published and put in front of the media a full 6 months before a closure can even be proposed. Add public hearings, statutory consultation periods, legal notices, and the very real chance that enough objections roll in to kill the closure outright, and you're looking at a process that can run into hundreds of thousands of pounds and years of staff time, with zero guarantee it even succeeds. Put those two numbers side by side, and the ghost train stops looking wasteful. It's actually the cheap option. Some operators have found an even cheaper shortcut. On the Watford to Croxley Green branch in Hertfordshire, the train service was quietly replaced with a bus back in 1996. Not because the line was officially closed, but specifically so it wasn't. The tracks are still legally in service. A bus just happens to be doing the job. It's the same trick, running on rubber tires instead of steel wheels, because a bus is even cheaper to operate than a nearly empty train. By the way, if you are enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe because we have a lot more coming. There's a second reason operators hang on to these lines, and it's less about avoiding paperwork and more about keeping options open. Take the Halton Curve, a short connector track linking North Wales, Cheshire, and Liverpool. For decades, it saw barely more than a single weekly train. It was never formally closed. Then, as the surrounding towns grew and road congestion worsened, restoring it started to make sense, and roughly £10.5 million later, it was carrying a real, regular passenger service again. Here's the part that matters. That project only worked because the line was never actually closed. If it had been shut down properly, the story looks completely different. Tracks lifted, land sold off or built over, legal rights to the corridor gone for good. Reopening from that position doesn't cost £10 million. It can cost tens or even hundreds of millions, and sometimes it's simply not possible because the land is already gone. So keeping a ghost train running is really a cheap insurance policy. For the price of a few £1,000s a year, an operator keeps every future option alive. The option to expand service if new housing goes up nearby, the option to use the line for freight or as a diversion route when another line floods or fails, and the option to never have to buy back land it already owns. That diversion value alone is worth more than people assume. When engineering works or a landslip shuts down a main line, having a quiet backup corridor already wired, signaled, and legally active can save weeks of disruption elsewhere on the network. Populations shift, towns grow. A line that looks pointless today can look essential in 15 years, and nobody wants to be the operator who paid to demolish the one thing the region ends up needing. Britain's ghost train loophole is a very British solution to a very British legal quirk. Other countries play this completely differently because they don't have the same rules forcing their hand. Take Japan. Unlike in the UK, Japanese rail operators have no legal obligation to keep a loss-making local line technically open. When JR Hokkaido decided its rural network was unsustainable, it didn't bother with once-a-week ghost trains. It announced plans to cut roughly 1,200 kilometers of track, nearly half its entire network. And lines like the Rumoi main lines road out to Mashike were simply shut for good. No token service, no legal fiction, no keeping the door open. Now flip to the United States, where the incentive runs in the opposite direction entirely. Amtrak doesn't run near-empty, long-distance trains to dodge a closure process. It runs them because Congress tells it to. Routes like the California Zephyr and the Southwest Chief lose tens of millions of dollars a year in operating costs alone, and Amtrak isn't allowed to simply cancel them. The losses aren't a loophole being exploited. They're a political mandate baked directly into law, because cutting a route means cutting off small towns that have no other inner-city transport option. And no member of Congress wants to be the one who voted to strand their own constituents. So now you've got three completely different machines producing the exact same headline. A train running mostly empty on purpose. Britain's regulatory system makes closing anything so painful that operators would rather quietly bleed a small amount of cash forever than fight the process. Japan's system makes it comparatively easy to cut a line loose, so operators do exactly that the moment the math stops working. And America's system removes the choice entirely, forcing the losses to stay on the books by law. None of this is really about the handful of passengers riding an empty carriage. It's about who's holding the bill and which set of rules is more expensive to break. None of this is free, and it isn't universally loved either. Every ghost train still needs a driver qualified on that specific route, which means keeping crews trained and current on track they might use once a year. A real, ongoing cost. Network Rail still has to inspect, maintain, and ensure track that carries almost nobody, because an unmonitored, overgrown rail line is a safety liability, whether or not anyone's riding it. Critics also point out this is a strange way to run a railway. Money spent maintaining barely used branch lines is money not spent adding capacity on the commuter routes packed to bursting every single morning. And there's the sheer absurdity of it. Timetables quietly listing trains nobody's supposed to catch, tickets that can't be booked through normal channels, platform announcements for stations that haven't seen a paying customer in years. It's the kind of bureaucratic contradiction that, once you notice it, you can't unsee. There's also a quieter cost that never shows up on a spreadsheet: public trust. Every time a ghost bus quietly swaps in for a train, or a timetable lists a service that's practically designed to be missed, it reinforces the idea that the rail network is being managed around box ticking rather than around actual passengers. That's a real reputational cost, even if nobody's put a precise number on it. But for as long as closing a line costs more than reviving one someday might, expect the ghost trains to keep running exactly on schedule. To nobody, for nobody, on purpose. So, are Britain's ghost trains a waste of money, or the smartest insurance policy the rail network owns? Depends how you look at it. To a passenger scrolling through a timetable, it's a bizarre little glitch. To an accountant weighing a few £1,000s a year in running costs against a few £100,000 in closure paperwork, plus the total, irreversible loss of a rail corridor, it's not a glitch at all. It's the obviously correct call, made over and over again for the last 60 years. That's the pattern behind a lot of what looks wasteful in big infrastructure. From the outside, a nearly empty train looks like money thrown away. Follow the actual numbers, and keeping something technically alive is often dramatically cheaper than the alternative, especially when reversing the decision decades from now might be impossible. The Halton curve proves the bet can pay off. Every ghost line still running today is quietly making the same bet, one nearly empty train at a time. Multiply that logic across dozens of routes, decade after decade, and what looks like waste on any single Saturday morning starts to look a lot like the railway's cheapest form of long-term risk management. So next time you spot a train running to some town you've never heard of, once a week at 6 in the morning, that's not a mistake. That's a company betting a few £1,000s a year that the future might need that line more than the present does. If you want to know why thousands of railroad workers are quitting, watch this video.